Hey there, it's Yelizaveta. This week, I'm replaying an episode that speaks to something I know many dancers carry quietly: the gap between how we feel on the inside and how we think we're supposed to look or dance like on the outside. Whether it's body image, confidence, musicality, or comparing yourself to others, this is the episode where I unpack a few realizations that shifted things for me a lot. If you're someone who struggles with self doubt in tango, I hope this helps you breathe a little easier and maybe even reframe what progress looks like. And if this resonates, come explore this work deeper inside my online program. There's a free trial linked in the description. All right, here's the replay. I'll see you next week. I don't know if there's a dance out there that challenges our own sense of self-worth and confidence the way tango does. There's something particularly sensitive about the experience of learning the technique of the dance, the social etiquette, the layers of musicality, and it all feels very complex and really overwhelming. And for most people, it takes maybe even years to get acclimated to what tango requires and to feel somewhat at ease when they go out dancing socially. But I actually noticed that a particular layer of self-doubt remains for a lot of dancers, especially for women. Those who start as followers, I think because of the gender imbalance, women automatically feel somewhat at a disadvantage. So it puts us in a place of a bit more comparison and contrasting ourselves with other dancers and trying to see whether we measure up a certain way. So I wanted to do an episode talking about some of the realizations and mindset shifts that I had along the way that allowed me to really break through some of my own limiting beliefs about myself. And honestly, these are not things that I was aware I thought about myself or that were limiting beliefs. And it was only in hindsight that I kind of saw what was limiting me in my own mind. I'm sure I had more than the ones I'm going to mention, but looking back, there were these particular moments where once I realized deeply something about tango and the truth about what I was going through, it really opened me up and changed my experience of tango for the better. And so I'm hoping that some of these will resonate with you as well. And perhaps as I'm sharing my own experience, you might think of your aha moments along the way that really opened up something in you and allowed you to overcome some self-doubt. And if you think of those, I would love to know what those are. So send me a message on social media at IMSO Tango, or you can just pop it in the comments below the episode. Would love to hear from you. For those of you joining me for the first time, you might not know that I also have a private Facebook group where I go live on a weekly basis. So if you'd like to have a bit more interaction with me and join the group and meet some other dancers around the world, go ahead and click on the link in the show notes. All right, if you haven't gathered already, this episode really is going to be speaking to followers. And I'm sure that there's an equivalent for men and leaders who struggle with confidence who come into tango. But I'm going to speak specifically to followers today. So the first one of these, I think, is going to be very familiar to any woman getting into tango. And it just has to do more with the superficial appearance of your own body. I think that when I went into tango, and this is true for many women, I believed that I needed to look a certain way in order to get dances. And getting feedback from leaders such as, oh, just wear a shorter skirt and that's how you get dances. That was advice that I got. And I hear that advice being passed around still to other followers. When you hear those kinds of things and considering the gender imbalance that's already in place when you start tango, it's really easy to get into this mode of comparing yourself to other women and aspiring to look a certain way, believing that you need to appear a certain way to get dances. And for me, there was also this paranoia that my body was not the right shape for tango, because I was observing that certain body types of women were more popular and were getting more dances. So I sort of looked at myself through this very narrow lens, believing that my beauty needed to somehow shift and mold to fit into a particular standard that tango was presenting to me. And I only realized this when I went to Buenos Aires for my 6-month spree of living there. And I remember when I went, the first few milongas that I visited, it struck me how much the women there were a lot more at ease with their bodies being not the correct proportions I was expecting. And to put it bluntly, there were women who were a little heavier. They had a bit more mass to them, and they would wear clothing that was very revealing. And I would even, see fat rolls hanging off their, midriff, or seeing a little bit of jiggle here and there. And to me, it was like, oh my God, that is so inappropriate. How can she do that? It was like I had visceral feelings of alarm and embarrassment for the women that I was seeing, sort of being so inappropriate. But the longer I was there, the more I saw that this was just their way of being in their bodies, that it kind of exposed that I was sort of in this very limited mindset, like I didn't even know. And so the longer I was there, the more I was around that, my sense of myself and what was okay and not okay began to shift. So it was a really interesting realization that when we're thinking about standards of beauty, or how, like, whatever demands we're putting on ourselves about how we're supposed to look, those are not set in stone. Those are not rigid. Those are things that are being molded within us by our environment. And, to me, as shallow as that sounds, at the time, when I was in my late 20s, I realized that men have lots of different preferences. And even though I'm fixated on this particular body type because I somehow believe that all men want that, the truth is that most men have lots of different preferences, and their interest is quite wide ranging. And that for many men, it is very attractive when women are a little heavier and have a bit more jiggle on them. Like, it's a different perspective altogether. So there is no one standard of beauty. And once you realize that, it kind of frees you up to not be so concerned and not keep striving after one particular look. That there is a place for you to relax and be yourself and look for your own feeling of comfort and elegance in your own body without having to feel like there's something lacking. And, you know, as I say this, I'm realizing I still very much work on the same thing. It's very much an ongoing process. Those feelings of inadequacy or somehow that you're not measuring up physically or that you're being outshined by other people. Like, that's always part of the conversation. But I think the shift is that you know, and I know that those things are not static, that it is not something that is set in stone, but is more of a fabricated idea based on where you are. So the reality is, tango is an invitation for us to choose to be a certain way that enhances our own experience of ourselves, amplifies our own uniqueness, right? Like ultimately, that's what we want to experience. And instead of thinking that in order to be there, we have to earn our stripes and we have to get to a place where we deserve to have that fulfillment, to be the dancers that we want to be, the reality is there is no destination like that. And we can just accept ourselves as we are now and move on. So that big mindset shift came when I was in Buenos Aires. And afterwards, I think it allowed me the freedom to let go of certain things like wearing clothes that are uncomfortable just because I want to appear attractive to men. Wearing heels because I believed if I don't wear heels, men will not ask me to dance, even though they're so painful. So my courage to let go of those things and actually do things that a way I wanted to do came from that mindset shift. Now, the second mindset shift came once I started leading. And again, it wasn't something I was even aware was a problem. I wasn't aware that I had this limiting belief about myself. But the insight came from me trying to make up for my own lack as a dancer when I started leading. And I felt like I was so behind. You know that feeling as a follower when you're working with some leaders and they're throwing out terms that you don't know and they're talking about cross system and parallel system and the difference between this orchestra and that orchestra. And as a follower, you might get this feeling of like, oh my God, they know so much. I used to think that. I used to watch my partners that I was with in class, and I would watch them do things or ask questions and feel so intimidated and so out of place because I did not understand what they were talking about. And to me, it was very embarrassing. So when I started leading, I was extra vigilant and really tried to overachieve and overcompensate for my lack. So, and eventually I would have these experiences where either in class or in conversation, I would ask other leaders certain things about technique of leading, about orchestras, or even if I danced with someone as a follower, and in that moment I was to ask them about something that they did, more often than not, they would say they don't know. They didn't have an answer for me. Either they weren't paying attention or they actually didn't think that deeply about this particular thing that I was asking. But what dawned on me after a few of those conversations and experiences was that, wow, leaders don't really know what's going on either. Like, like it's an impression that they know a lot when you're a follower because you haven't learned the language and the figures and you sort of don't have the connection to that part of it. But when you just go below the surface, it's actually very clear that a lot of times leaders are just guessing. Like when they lead you into things and they're doing all of this quote unquote fancy vocabulary that you are impressed with, and you might think like, wow, they really know a lot. There's just so much to know there. Once you actually get to know those pieces yourself, you realize that actually it's not that much to know. And beyond that, leaders are just in the same place as followers. Like when I lead, there are many times that I'm doing exactly what I would do as a follower. I'm just present and I'm just following. I don't have some sort of grand plan in my head. Perhaps maybe that sometimes people develop that, and there are virtuosic dancers that are thinking 15 steps ahead, and they're the ones who become professionals and virtuosic and invent their own brand of tango. Like there are dancers like that. But the majority of dancers, I would say, majority of leaders are very much at a very generalized level of knowledge of their role. And beyond that, they're just riffing. Sometimes they'll make mistakes, but you don't even register it because they sort of cover it up. And it's actually really funny to realize this. And once I kind of saw this, it's kind of like a Wizard of Oz moment, you see the mechanism, you draw the curtain and you see what's behind. That moment was really important because in my mind, I realized I'm on the same level with the leaders. Now, of course, there are differences in what the roles entail. And I would say just because you really know following very well doesn't mean that you know automatically what the leader knows, right? Like, obviously, that is not the case. You really do need to know both in order to speak to both. However, I'd say when you're in class with leaders who are learning something new and they're frustrated or they don't understand something and they need to figure it out, like you have just as much knowledge and just as much power to contribute to that exploration as them. Because a lot of times what I see, and I did this myself, is that when leaders are working on something, the followers are just there waiting for the leaders to figure it out because they're like, okay, they have it. They know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing, but they know what they're doing. So that situation happens where the followers sort of disengage and wait for the leaders to figure it out. The other thing that might happen is that the leader might take over and speak for the couple and tell you and give you feedback, and you don't speak up because you don't feel like you know enough. You're just a beginner. You're just a follower. You don't know everything that this leader knows. And I got to tell you, a lot of times when I'm hearing this feedback or seeing it in class, the person giving the feedback a lot of times knows very little, and probably maybe sometimes even less than the other person, maybe a little bit more, but most of the time there really needs to be more equality. And it's because as followers, we feel sort of inadequate and lacking. We don't give ourselves the credit for what we do know, that we don't speak up. And so kind of realizing deeply to yourself that whatever level you're at, just know you're not as behind as your partner, as the leaders that you're working with. And a lot of times leaders actually need your help to figure things out, but they don't know how to ask it because for a lot of leaders, they're used to be the ones in charge. For many of them, they're just put in charge because they're the leader. So I'm sure there are leaders who would be happy to have your help in figuring things out in a class environment. And I want to pause here and make this point that has been a really important observation for my years of teaching and dancing tango. And that is that for the most part, I find that followers have better technique and better musicality than leaders on the whole. And what I mean by that is following requires more sophisticated technique than leading. When we're thinking just about the demand on the body of acquiring new skills, following is more difficult than leading because you have to walk backwards. You have to do it in heels a lot of times. You have to be on one foot primarily while you're doing embellishments and lots of different other fireworks with your free leg. So it actually is built into the role that you develop a more sensitive, sophisticated technique when you follow. So when followers begin leading, as beginner leaders, they automatically have better sensitivity and technique than leaders who are just starting from leading. So that's one thing. But then also the musicality, hands down, followers are more sensitive to the music a lot of times than leaders. And it's a big complaint I get from followers who are really in tune with the music and then they dance with leaders who are not and they get frustrated. It's the follower role that ends up making you more musically inclined and more sensitive to the music than if you start leading. Because for leaders who just go into leading right away, it takes quite a bit of time for them to get to a place where they understand what musicality is. And this is one of the biggest complaints in tango from followers, right? Is that leaders a lot of times get fixated on vocabulary and do repetitive figures over and over again, and they don't stop when the music stops, or they don't slow down when the music slows down. For leaders to progress to the level where they know how to fit the movements that they know into musicality, how to make their movements musical, it takes some time. But followers, just by virtue of having to follow and listen to many, many types of interpretations of the same songs over and over again through different leaders, followers develop a keener sensitivity to musicality. So just knowing those two things right away, that as a follower, you have better technical abilities already than leaders who are starting brand new, as well as your musicality is more on point. Those two things should give you more confidence to speak up in class, basically, is what I'm saying, because you really do have a lot to offer. And most of the time, followers don't think that they do. They feel like they need to be quiet and they need to listen to the leader. But the reality is that followers are the ones who have a lot of the knowledge that needs to come up when you're working through different things, especially when it comes to musicality ideas. Which brings me to my last big realization. Musicality, I keep talking about it because this is just such an important and key piece to dancing tango. The other day, I was actually talking to someone about playing piano. And, I grew up playing piano. And when I was little, my teacher wanted me to learn music theory. She wanted me to learn to read the music, to be able to count. And I was so resistant. I was just a little rebel. I just did not want to learn it. I did not. I hated it. I hated looking at the page. I just wanted to hear it. I wanted to play intuitively. I wanted to just close my eyes and be in the zone. That's what I wanted to be able to do. But she wanted me to count and read sight read, and I just really disliked it. So at some point, she caved because she kind of saw that unless she did cave, I would quit. And she really wanted me to continue playing, so she did not push it. And I continued playing, and I played for about 10 years. But then when I moved to the States and I got a new teacher, this teacher was a professional conservatory trained performing musician. Like, she was the real deal. And she was so tough and demanded so much of me that it broke me and I quit. And the reason was that I did not have the foundation of music theory to support me, because she wanted me to play more complicated pieces that required you to understand the theory. It required you to understand how to integrate these complex chords and melodies into your hands. And I just couldn't handle the pressure. I didn't have the backbone, really. So I quit. And I was sharing this story with a friend of mine who is a music teacher. And she said, rightly so, that she makes all of her students learn music theory. And she said, if you don't learn music theory, you're stuck. You're forever just a puppet playing the same things and executing, melodies and whatever, but you're not actually free to create. You don't have the freedom to grow and create your own music in a way. That's how I understood what she was saying. And it really resonated for me in the same way that I think about musicality for tango, that you can dance tango for many years without knowing the music, without really paying attention to it, but you're only going to get so far. Musicality then has a real purpose in liberating you from that trap of being controlled just by the vocabulary. What separates good dancers from great dancers is, again, the musicality piece. It's not the virtuosic innovation in vocabulary. Like, that looks cool. It's fun to look at. But in terms of experiencing between me and my partner, what counts is the connection to the music. So if I have a choice of dancing with somebody who knows a lot of vocabulary and is pretty good with, everything else, and then somebody else who's really good at musicality, I'm going to choose the musicality because that's where my interest lies as a dancer. Musicality in tango is very literal. And by literal, I mean, if the sound is big and loud, you make a loud, big step. And if the sound is small and quiet, you make a short and quiet step. What you're doing with the music is you're showing it through your body. Okay, it's very literal. And it took me a long time to understand this. I mean, I came from a place where I didn't even understand what an orchestra was. That was my beginning point. I did not like tango music, full disclosure, when I first started. And I remember taking a particular class. The teacher said, okay, we're going to play this song. Okay, now you actually sing the song while you're walking. You hum it along. You don't have to be in key, by the way. You hum along with the song. And whenever you run out of air in your lungs and you have to pause to take a breath in, synchronize your movement and pause right at that moment as you exhale. And then when you inhale and begin to sing again, you walk. Very simple concept, right? But I got to tell you, once I did that a couple of times, that was sort of the beginning of my journey that took me to this place now where musicality is basically all I think about these days. This is what I teach. This is what I talk about. This is what I geek out on. I'm sort of obsessed with it. But it just started with this one piece of puzzle that said to me that musicality is not something theoretical and abstract. It's not like I have to learn something that is not already intrinsic to me, right? It's not separate from me. It's right there. It's the music itself. I listen to it and it's as if I'm walking it out. I'm marking it with my body. I'm creating shapes to show to the listener the structure of the song. So this kind of way of listening frees you up to have your own relationship to the music. You don't have to have anybody explain to you how to dance anymore. You can listen to it yourself and learn to do it just by following that principle, by saying, oh, I move when the music moves and I stop when the music stops. Of course, between those two extremes of playing and stopping, there's all these other parts to it. There's the melody, there's the rhythm, there's the syncopation. There's that part where the strings dominate. And then there's that part when the bandoneon dominates. And then there's that part when it's the vocals. There's all these layers that you yourself can become aware of just by knowing what to listen for. Once I realized that, suddenly I felt very empowered as a dancer to express myself. And I felt very comfortable thinking to myself, anytime I went to milonga, oh, the music is my teacher now. I don't have to have anybody else interpret it for me right now. I can just be with the music and I can follow the music. I can struggle to remember it. I can try things with it. I can build my own relationship to it. I don't have to wait for someone to tell me how to relate to it. And that was pretty big. I have to say, it came at the time when I was starting to lead more and more. So it was very relevant to me as a leader. But I think as a follower, it opened up something for me as well, because suddenly I was in on the game. I understood what the leader is trying to do. So when I would dance with somebody who obviously really knew the song, obviously wanted to show all the little pieces of the puzzle that the song is, it was like I was in on the game. I could play along. I could contribute. And that's really when I started getting the more consistent experience of dancing with people that I really, really enjoyed, and I was really getting fulfilled. Possibly because my sense of musicality was more visible and other dancers could see it. It's something that's really obvious to people who know what to look for. So you'd be surprised that when you slow down and just become musical, you will find other people will compliment you, and people who didn't want to dance with you before will want to dance with you. And that's just because musicality is very potent. It's very visible when you see it in a person, and it signals to the other person very clearly what kind of dancer you are. And recently, even, there's this fear and anxiety for some women who, like myself, have become more of a leader more consistently. I don't wear heels. A lot of times I'm just wearing my flats and my pants. So there's many leaders who don't actually know that I follow, and sometimes it's a little sad that people don't know that I follow as well. But I was at an event recently and I was mostly leading. And there was a teacher, professional dancer there, teacher visiting from Buenos Aires. And he capaceoed me after some time. And the first thing he said was, I saw you leading, and the way you led, I thought to myself, I bet she's a good follower. And it was very rewarding to hear him say that, because that's exactly what it means. Even though there might be that sentiment still out there that as a female leader, somehow you stop being a good follower, you're not as sensitive or whatever. It's not been my experience. Overall, I actually feel the opposite, that learning to lead musically and discovering that pathway in my mind to the music where I can really tune into the music then made me that much more powerful as a follower, because now I could help the leader in more ways. Because I understood what they're trying to do. And a lot of leaders will ask me like, how do you do that? It's like, you're reading my mind. And it's like, no, it's because I'm listening to the same thing. I'm in on it. I'm in on the joke. So those are the three big shifts that were really relevant to me. I'm curious if any of these resonated with you. The body image piece, that really there's no such thing as a perfect body image in tango. Secondly, leaders don't actually know much more than you do most of the time. And musicality is super, super literal. So you, whatever level you're at, you really do have the ability to learn to hear the music the way you need to and to make your dance better that way. We will continue this banter next week. Until then, ciao.